had these gigantic blueberry bushes in my yard, in the backyard when we were kids, and it was one of the few chores or whatever we had to do that I remember asking my mom, "Why can let me just go weed carrots or something? I don't eat blueberries at all. Why do I have to participate in the blueberry picking?"
Did you say weed carrots?
I honestly just think it was a way to keep, considering the time period we grew up in, it was just a way of locking kids out of the house.
That was pulling dandelions for us.
The worst was the weeding, just nonstop weeding. I remember like in Springfield, where everybody couldn't wait for the weekend. I'm like, can I just stay here? Because it meant I had to work all goddamn weekend. And it's like, what do? You hate school? You hate your home life? Where the fuck do you go? Oh, Dungeons and Dragons. That's where you go. Dungeons and Dragons, comic books, reading, whatever you could get your imagination wrapped around.
See, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about a boogie woogie, and I'm going to play one.
This is Better Off Dad with Paul and Steve. We're trying to figure out how to do the right thing when things are hard. And, I was thinking about all that. Like, there is a certain value in locking the kid out of the house and making him be outside pulling weeds or whatever. I don't know. Builds character, I guess. I don't know. It
Sure.
seems like it. But my new thing is to assume everything that I thought was true, just assume the opposite's true.
Right.
Like the whole the recent conversation was, 80% of communication is nonverbal. Like I've heard
Right.
that my
Yeah.
entire professional career, right?
Yeah.
It's like, so that's why you got to be face to face. That's why you got to be in person. And when they sit back across their arms like this, it means that. And when they have their hands on their hips, it means this. And when they're making eye contact, it's like
Mm,
it's like a whole other language, right? I'm
yeah.
now just going to assume that's all bullshit.
I think it is to a degree because when I would go to therapy, I'd like go like this and then be like, oh no, wait, she probably thinks I'm being defensive, so I'll do this. Oh no, that's defensive, and then so would just start doing this at random times, not even just. And I'm sure she was smart enough to figure out I was messing with her, but
Like maybe the person's cold, or maybe like they don't know what else to do with their arms. It's kind of
well,
more
when
comfortable.
yeah, exactly.
The My fear though is that some of this stuff may be correct. And I
Mm.
haven't made my kids do much of anything really. And Andy writes A. Williams post the other day about, oh yeah, the military, they have to teach people how to do things because otherwise they'll, take a shit in somebody's van. And I thought, and he's like, because their parents didn't teach them how to do anything. And I was like, oh crap. Better than, I'm not saying my kids would go take a shit in somebody's van, but I haven't really taught them how to do many of the things that a boomer would consider necessary life skills.
I mean, their dad did one time take a shit in a sack, so
That was necessary and important.
that's right. That's a life skill.
That is a life skill. It's not easy either. For those if you haven't heard,
Can't imagine.
it was an RV where no solid waste was allowed in the RV toilet. Well, toilet paper was fine, but not poop. So no poop in the RV was the rule. But I had to go really bad, and there was no way I was going to make it anywhere else. So I think I emptied out somebody's extra batteries or something out of their grocery. But the one of those plastic with the handles thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, this can't be that hard.
Well, at least it wasn't those like plastic bags the stores have today, because they wouldn't stand a chance.
Those are all holy. It would just like leak out of there. Yeah.
Anyway,
So the trick is you gotta hover and it's like, you know what, when I say the Norden bomb site, you know what I'm talking about?
yes,
You know, like that in that show about the Enola Gay, the dude's like looking
like
through
30
the,
seconds over Tokyo.
yeah, 30 seconds over Tokyo or something like that, you know? And it's like, you don't just drop the bomb and it doesn't just go straight down, you know, to hit the city. So you're not like, okay, we're over the city, drop the bomb on them. No, there's wind and there's like trajectory and there's the direction it comes out of the chute and all that. You got to take all that into account, right? So if you're trying to catch a bomb, you don't just hold the bag underneath where you think it would fall out of. You got to hold it where it's going. It's like Wayne Gretzky used to say, you don't skate to where the puck is, you skate to where the puck's going to be. So you don't put the sack where you think it's going to go, or where it is, you put the sack where it's going to go. Anyway, you know, my knees were shaking, my arms got weak. Mom spaghetti, all of that stuff. So anyway.
Good thing you went to college.
What does that have to do with parenting? Oh, what does
life
that have to
skills?
Life skills. That's right. That's right. Life skills. No, I'm that parent. By the way, ask me anything, folks, because I'm the parent you probably complain about. Because I have been pretty lenient as a parent when it comes to school, especially with the academic part of school.
Which is insane coming from you, with considering your background, which is probably why, honestly, I get it.
Those who know me know that the most important thing in the world to me was pleasing adults. That sounds weird. And also explains a lot.
Dude, give me a warning.
I didn't know.
Right.
I couldn't warn myself. I didn't know I was going to say that. You ever just start a sentence, you have no idea where it's going?
That's most of my life.
Yeah. It was important to me to get the approval of the adults and the authority figures in my life. And I figured out from an early age, one of the ways to do that was to do the work correctly in school. And when you do the work correctly as instructed, when instructed, on time, as many times as instructed, you end up with A's. And then once you get that A and you get the praise from the parents and the other kids, it's like, oh, wow, you must be some kind of smart person. You're like, well, I wasn't born this way. I'm not Lady Gaga or Madonna. Who was it?
Lady Gaga.
Lady Gaga. Right? I wasn't born smart. We all are born smart. So I should put it that way. Anybody who makes their sole aim in life to appease the adults, and if you have the right that's the part I was born with, is I was born with probably the right neurological whatever, that like my style of learning matched up with the way they were teaching. So we'll put it that way. That's the part I was born with.
You and like the only you and maybe one other kid in Springfield Township were born that way.
Yeah, Billy Sikorsky, I think.
I think you're right.
Lisa Thorndike was pretty up there too. I think we were, Anyway, yeah, Billy and I came out of Springfield Township and took the rest of the city by storm because they didn't think anything came out of Springfield Township. and he and I were just like acing every test. And I was like, what is going on?
I mean, in the rest of the world's defense, the rest of the world isn't wrong. I mean,
they're like, what school do you go to? Joy or Queen of All Saints or, one of those other places that the rich kids went. Anyway, nope, Springfield Township. They're like, what? Really? Anyway, so I did really well in school. Valedictorian in my high school class. All that stuff, right? 4.0, grade point average before they had the extra, where you could get higher than a 4.0 was before those days.
I don't know who set that up.
Yeah, I probably would have tried to get something even higher. I don't know if I would have been successful, but I probably would have, right? Then I get to college. And college for me was like, like you're running full speed and then you don't see that you're about to run through a river and it just slows you down. Like you're running, like this is easy. I'm running. This is great. And then suddenly you're like your feet are caught in quicksand or something.
Mm-hmm.
Because in college, it's much more difficult to do the things and get the grades and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I was out of my element. College was nothing like high school for me. And I didn't do great. And it caused, I believe, a lot of the anxiety, depression stuff that I deal with today.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think goes back to those 4 years of dealing with thinking I needed to become somebody else to be successful. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And it all went back to thinking grades were the most important thing. So fast forward to being a dad,
Mm-hmm.
and from an early age, I told my kids, learn the stuff. There's a lot of great stuff to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Be curious, read what you like to read the
Yes.
stuff they tell you to read in school, because it's a curation. They're giving you the basic stuff that a well-read person, To Kill a Mockingbird, and that's the only book I can think of. All the good,
That's
all the
the
good
only
ones.
book you need.
All the good ones, right?
I mean, she only wrote one book. You only got to read one book. So.
That's right. I agree with you. I think she only wrote one book. I'm not sure she wrote Go Set a Watchman or whatever that's called.
Well, that's what it originally started out as, and
Mhm.
the publisher read it and was like, "Okay, this is a good book, but this chapter right here, this is your book." So that's where To Kill a Mockingbird came from.
Well, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
The more you learn. The more you know.
I mean, to Go Set a Watchman is a good book. It really is, but it never would have lasted the way that To Kill a Mockingbird did, because Mockingbird captured what was going on at that point in time, and then that's why the publisher was like, write this.
Hmm.
I thought it would have been fun because, getting off track for just a second, Mockingbird covered essentially the writer as a child. Okay. Watchmen covered the writer as a young lady. I would have loved to have had a third book as an old woman, so you'd have, like the maiden crow thing, get the 3 stages of this person's life just to see the difference. But alas, it didn't happen.
Sort of an epic.
Yeah, it would have been a nice little trilogy.
Yeah.
But when your first book is the strongest of your trilogy, maybe you don't need a trilogy. So yeah, scratch that.
Tell that to all of the Hollywood,
Yeah.
they make one good movie and then make 18 sequels, right? So
Look at
anyway,
the
so
Star Wars.
I've been talking to the kids for a long time. Learn the stuff, do the best you can, but you know what? The grade is just, it's a number. It measures, and this is what I've been telling them as they've gotten old. Like when they were young, I would tell them that. Like, I'm not that worried about your grades. Try to get good grades. The better grades you get, the more options you'll have later on. But it's not the most important thing. Most important things to me are, as we talked last time, your safety. But I didn't really talk to them about that. I talked to them about one of my jobs is to keep you safe. So when you jump off of the sofa onto the floor,
I remember that story.
I'm like, I want you to be a person who takes risks and is not afraid to try new things. But one of my jobs is to keep you safe. So it's always a balance, which could be a whole episode.
It's always fun when you catch them midair.
Yeah.
They're about to go out the window.
Yeah, right. So I want one of them to be curious and learn and stuff, but not be too worried about the grade.
Right.
And then the pandemic comes along. And everybody's grades, everybody, my oldest grades went through the basement.
Yeah, same.
Like
same here.
He was straight A student with a couple of B's freshman year. And like father, like son, right? And and I would even talk to him like he would get bent out of shape, like, oh no, I'm not going to get a in this class, and I'd be like, remember what I've always said, B's great.
Yeah.
And he would argue with me, right? So I was in that weird situation where grades were important to him, they weren't important to me. Then the pandemic happened, and things went haywire. And that's where it was like, okay, now we're going to have this awkward conversation that says, yes, grades don't matter, and I don't want you to get depressed or anything over your grades. However, you have to turn in your work
Yes.
because they won't let you out of high school if you
Yes.
don't get at least, C's
Mm-hmm.
and D's, right? So you can't just continue. The grade's not important, but passing is.
Yeah.
So
Yes. That's the same boat I'm in,
mm,
because for my youngest, for his entire school life, on top of the pile, he used to
mm,
get sent to the older classes to get books to read, all that. And of course, middle school starts out kind of sketchy in general. Pandemic hits, everything falls apart. And then last year, towards the end of the last school year, his grades went back up where they were before.
mm,
And this year, I'm not making that mistake. This year, I'm like, all I want is, because I said, well, first of all, high school is way different than middle school. All I want is your butt in the seat and just do the work.
mm.
The grade, which I don't put emphasis on anymore, because I'm kind of the opposite of you. My problem was my grades were so terrible. I didn't want my kids to have have good. I wanted them to have good grades, so I kind of stressed it a lot.
Mm.
We've learned a lot over the pandemic. Everybody has. Well, if you turn in the work, the grade does it. The work does its job,
Yeah,
and we're pretty much back to where we were, but there's zero emphasis on grade. There's just emphasis on pass.
yeah, right.
So
And so that's how we're raising our kids. It could be wrong. We reserve the right to be wrong, right?
well, that's the difference, because
Mhm.
we're over here saying, that's how we're doing it. We could be wrong.
Yeah.
Previous generations like, nope, this is the way to do it. We're right.
I also had this thought, and now I can't remember if it was a dream or a thought experiment I did. That happens to me sometimes.
I don't know
You,
what
you
you're on. Was it a
fast
dream or a
forward,
thought experiment?
yeah, fast
Right.
forward 10, 15 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I think parents think sometimes, and I caught myself doing it, and then I realized, no, that's not how it's going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
because it never happens like this. Like in our fantasy, right? The kid grows up and they look back and they're famous for some reason. They're being interviewed for some reason. Somebody's asking them about their childhood, and they're going to be like, I didn't understand it at the time, but my dad really went through a lot for me, and he worked his butt off, and he was just so wise and helped me through a lot of difficult situations and helped me see the world in context. And I didn't get it at the time, but I tell you what, I really get it now. And I just really appreciate that, right? That's our fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
In my thought experiment, that's not how it's going to go, right? How it's going to go is, yeah, I had a good childhood. Yeah, there were some difficult times. And they're going to be like, you ever think about how hard your parents worked? And it's going to be like, no, I think they made a lot of mistakes. Like every parents make mistakes, right? And
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really think about it that much. I'm just like focused on my life now, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
that interviewer is gonna come to me, or actually they're gonna ask him, how do you think your dad would feel you saying this, right? And his answer, this is my fantasy, right? Is that his answer would be, um, I think he'd be okay. He probably did it. He didn't do it like so that someday I would praise him and say what a great dad he was. That's not why he was doing it. So I think he'd be
Right.
fine with me saying, I don't think about it that much. He knows what he did.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't need me to tell him how great he was.
Yeah.
So I think he's fine with that. And then they would come to me and ask me, and I'd go, yeah, I'm fine with it. Like I know what I did.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds about right. I know what I did. I know I made a lot of mistakes, and I know I did a lot of good. I know he is who he is today, in part because of me, but in larger part because of what he's done. Right.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
I mean, obviously, yeah. Yeah.
and then they would be like, "Well, that's weird. Most parents want to hear what a great job they did." And I'm like, "Yeah, at a deeper level, though, we know even if they said that, we know that would be for the benefit of the camera, right?"
Yeah. Yes.
Because that's what you're supposed to say. You're supposed to be like, "Oh, my parents worked so hard. We came from nothing, and we worked hard, and they instilled a work ethic in me." And I just don't think that's reality most
No.
of the time.
No.
So
That's a script.
Yes, exactly. Which reminds me, my old, I'm glad my oldest doesn't listen to this because I think he would absolutely hate me using him as an example and talking about his grades and stuff. He'd be like, "No, people are gonna think, it's like, no. First of all, no, they're not really, but okay, sorry." But he doesn't listen. Maybe someday he will, and that's during that interview, he'll be like, "And I didn't realize he was doing that stupid podcast talking about me, and now I'm mad at him for that." My life is ruined because of that. You're cool, dude. You're cool. So 15 years from now, if you're listening to this, I still love you. I loved you then. I love you now. We were talking about college applications, which he's not going to college right away. But he is in like AP English or something, where one of the assignments is write a college essay, and as if you're applying to college.
Sure.
And so they give them this example essay, like, here's an example, and here are the questions. Read the essay. This was an application to Harvard. And read through the essay and write down the ideas you think the writer was trying to convey and how effective they were at conveying those ideas. And then think about, if you were on the committee that reads the applications, what would you take from this letter? The letter was, so this kid's applying to Harvard. When I was a little girl, my mom and I used to play Monopoly, and she wouldn't let me win. Like, a lot of parents will let their kids win, but she never let me win, so I never did win. But I got mad at first, but then my mom taught me that, you can learn through failure. And I would observe her because she would win. I would observe what she's doing, buying the properties and the hotels and buying the houses. By this time, I'm like, yeah, we're aware of how Monopoly works. Okay, you don't have to. We all know how Monopoly works.
Thanks for padding the essay with Monopoly rules.
Exactly. Would you copy and paste that out of Parker Brothers website? So she goes, yeah, I learned work ethic and how to learn from your mistakes, and failure is not failure. And when I was 12, I won my first game and it felt so good. And I learned success can come from failure. Right? So Eli goes, so my response, the answer to the question is, like, if I was on the committee reading this, my response would be, this is the most patronizing, contrived, like, I'm surprised. Like, are you actually serious with this essay? And do you actually think that I'm sitting here reading it thinking you're serious? Like, oh, learn from your mistakes, and from failure can come success if you just have the right attitude. And he just ripped this essay a new one. It was just like, I can't believe you would even submit this essay thinking that we would think this is reality.
Yeah, it's like the Christmas story. A plus.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm telling you, this generation of kids are freaking savage.
They are.
And I love it because we would have come up with a completely, like, cut and paste answer to that essay.
Not we'd be trying to get an A.
Yeah, this generation would be like, that's bullshit.
We'd be like, the way to get an A from this teacher is to give the correct answer that I know is correct. I really think this is a BS essay, but but I know the right answer is learn from your failures and you get back on that. And so we were joking about he's going to write the essay because it's an assignment, and he's talking about he's going to put what he's learned from riding horses, and one horse in particular, and how the horse taught him a lot of stuff and whatever. It's going to be great. And I said, make sure you put in there, like, when you fell off that horse, your instructor told you to get back on. And the thing you learned is, when you fall off of your horse, you have to get back on that horse.
and make sure that you explain that your instructor was Tom Hanks.
Yes. Or that guy from the Horse Whisperer. Who was that guy?
Some kind of terrible Ron Howard feel-good movie.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Oh, God, Kevin Costner. Oh, he played a horse.
Well, one of the horses that Eli loves is named Rudy. So that was that was an inspirational movie, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Hey, look,
Frodo.
guys, the special needs kid thinks he can play football. Wow, this will be inspirational. Let's let him pretend he's playing, and then we'll all feel good about ourselves.
Give him a false sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, I read a article on ableism recently, and they called that movie out as one of the examples.
Yeah, my
of
Atticus hates it.
Just horrible. Like, we thought it was right. We thought that was a good thing, but it's exactly like, what was that Sandra Bullock one? Where she kidnapped that black dude off the street and made him play football.
Blindside.
Blindside, that's it. Yeah. The total white savior. Like, the only way this kid was ever going to make it in life is for some suburban white lady to pick him up off the streets and have him do violence.
Yes.
In sport, have him do some violent teaching, because that's all he's good for is violence. And it's just like, oh my God. Anyway, we're off of parenting now. I'm back on.
I don't know.
Parenting has taught me that stuff, though. I mean,
yes.
It's like having kids that caused me to like get interested in that stuff. Like, my kids have neurodivergent friends and stuff, and just have talked to me about it and like what they're like. And they're like, it's like you and I have talked when we were in school. We just called them the weird kids, right? And we were accepting of everybody, and they just found their way to us and to D&D and just being our friends and us being their friends, right?
Yeah.
And now I look back on it, I'm like, wow, like that was a thing we just didn't know about.
Right. Well, you know what? Yesterday, usually Max's mom picks him up after school. Yesterday she couldn't, so we went and got him. And he's standing out there waiting for the, waiting where all the parents pull up. Well, we got there really early, so I basically got out of the car and snuck up around, and basically jump scared him. Well, he's there hanging out with his kids now. This group has only been together for a couple of days. Like, I think school's only been like 2.5 weeks, and jibber jabbering with the new kids and stuff. I get in the car and I'm like, kids today are so much better. School is so much better than it was when we were kids. Because you still had those, like the tall jock people, and they're all cookie cutters. They all look the same.
Yeah.
But then there's this mass of just what would have been different back then.
Yeah.
It's like, damn. I mean, as much as I don't want to live vicariously through my kids at all, but I guess it's nice to know that that's where we're at.
Speaking of living vicariously and how much different our lives could have been, the dungeon master at the D&D club, he's graduated now, but he was a couple years older. But his name is Isaac, and everybody loves Isaac. Like, he would have been like a more realistic version of Eddie Munson from Stranger Things. Right? He's a little bit older. He's got the long hair, good looking. Everybody loved him. The boys and the girls loved this guy, and the non-binaries loved this guy. Right. And because he was the coolest. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Where was that when we didn't have that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, but by the same token, you want to celebrate that with them. It's like, yes, you have, or if I want to be like sarcastic about it, it's like, well, you're welcome.
You're welcome. We blazed the trail for you.
That's right.
If we're going to be sarcastic, I'm going to say we had it hard then. It was really difficult for us. I don't think it's fair that the weird kids don't have it difficult today. I think they should be bullied and made to feel different and terrible, just like we were. Because we suffered, they should have to suffer too. Right? It's just not fair for them not to suffer.
My kids would have lost interest in the things coming out of my mouth at that point. That was too long. You're welcome. Just works.
You're welcome.
It's just so much more succinct.
Oh, yes. So that's my take on. So here's back to grades. So So what are grades then? And I've explained this to my kids, and if it comes back to bite me, it won't come back to bite me. It'll come back to bite them. Then so be it. But I 100% believe that what a grade measures, and not just a grade, but standardized test, what it measures is compliance.
Mm-hmm.
And you show me a student with an A, and I'll show you that they complied with instructions, right?
Yeah.
There is the rare student. Maybe they're not that rare, but if they are good at writing, say it's an English class or a composition class, and they're really good at writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have an A, those two are mutually exclusive. You got the A by being compliant.
Yes.
You
Yes.
became a
yes.
good writer by being interested and curious and practicing.
Yes.
And I think that's how our schools are still built. I think they're still built to turn out compliant. And if you look how they're run, they hire retired police, sometimes off-duty police, firefighters, just all these first responder types who are like on a hair trigger and probably were in the military. And their whole mindset is any one of these students is going to crack and do something they're not supposed to at any given moment if I don't keep control of them. Like a prison. And I say this all the time. They run schools like I'm not talking about the teachers necessarily. I'm talking about the other staff, the people that roam the halls. And if you're not right where you're supposed to be, like we even joke, like it's always, where are you supposed to be? Like they're always asking them where they're supposed to be. And I'm like, your answer should be like, right here. Where are you supposed to be?
That's right.
And so, yeah, my son has a love-hate relationship with the school administration. The principal loves him. The security guys don't. Because, he doesn't fit their cookie cutter version of what a high school student should be. So he's trouble. He's a troublemaker.
Why would you even worry about what the hall monitor guy thinks about you when he's just the that's his life. He's the hall monitor guy.
He's the hall monitor. He probably was the guy that checked and made sure people had their passes, when they were kids. But here's my point on this one is, and I was trying to make this point with Jim McLean, beloved comic artist and math teacher. So he knows way more about this than I do, and we'll have him on someday because we keep threatening to do it, but we'll have him on to talk about some of this stuff. Is from a parent's perspective, not a teacher's. So I'm sure teachers have completely different perspective, right? You take 3,000 kids with raging hormones, all different ages, throw them into the same building, run that building like a prison, and literally have them so packed in there that they can't move. The other day, he was telling me a fight broke out in the middle of a traffic jam, and like literally there was almost a trample event, right? Because there's so many people, and the way you run it is through compliance and discipline, as if you're running a prison. Like everybody's got to be a certain place at a certain time. Nobody has any autonomy or agency, right? And then you put them out onto society where they're, now what do you expect's going to happen? This is how, and by the way, a lot of the kids, they don't have necessarily stable home environments, right? So they got a lot of stuff going on, and you're not addressing their needs in the way they need to be addressed.
Right.
So this is the moment when a boomer would be like, well, what would you do differently? How would you fix it? What's your idea for fixing it?
That's code for that for them is code for, but I'm not going to listen.
My answer to that is, what are you asking me for? Didn't you go to school for this? Isn't this your career? Aren't you interested enough? Aren't there books written? Aren't there studies? Aren't there conferences you can go to? It's kind of like I had my eyes open when I was talking to somebody about bullying, and they said, well, what is their bullying policy? Like, what is their anti-bullying policy? I was like, it's a good question. I don't know. She's like, you should ask them that. Like, because I was like, what can we tell them to do differently? How can we tell them, what can we tell? And she's like, that's not your job. It's not your job to figure out like how they should be doing their job. So that to your point, that whole question of, well, what would you do differently? A, that means they're not going to listen.
Mhm.
But B, it means they're just abdicating and going, we can't think this is how we've always done it. We're not
Yeah.
going to bother trying to do it differently or do it a better way. And so we're brushing you off, basically saying there is no other way. This is the only way. And nobody's ever thought of a better way to do it ever anywhere.
It's policy,
Yeah, it's policy.
the P word.
Yeah. So I'm like, well, it's your job.
Yeah.
It'd be like if you came to me, like we provide management consulting services, right?
Mhm.
And if they came to me and said, hey, that project was late, maybe you should try a different way of managing projects so that they're not late. And I'd
Mhm.
go, well, how would you manage that project in the highly regulated pharmaceutical industry? Math teacher, how would you manage that project differently? And they're like, I'm not a project manager. I don't work in the highly regulated pharmaceutical industry. Why am I supposed to give you the answer to how to do it better? Right? I'm just telling you
Right.
the results indicate you should find a better way to do it. Right.
Mhm.
So, but other than that, though, I haven't really given it a lot of thought.
I can tell you need to take a little while. Think it through. Don't just come out of nowhere, flying by the seat of your pants with these answers.
Right.
I love the compliance idea. I'm gonna have to use that one. I haven't really thought of it in that sense, but yeah, that's 100% accurate.
Here's my nutshell history of public education in the United States, possibly other industrialized economies as well. There wasn't any, until the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
And then, you got all these factory workers, and the industry looked and said, we're having to teach them, it's like, what do you got to have to be a good factory worker? Well, you got to be able to follow instructions, normally written instructions. So you got to be able to read.
Mhm.
You've got to be able to write down your amount you made and how the machine was set up, all that. So you got to be able to write, and you got to be able to do some basic calculations. When you set the machine up or set the speed up to do certain things, like you got to be able to do some basic math.
Mhm.
Nobody could read, nobody could write, and nobody knew how to do basic math, right?
Mhm.
So they said, basically, industry got together and said, we've got to do something about this. So the first public schools were set up and funded, and inclusion with the government, were set up and funded by these major industries, because they said no one, like Henry Ford isn't going to go set up a school because he doesn't know who's going to work at Ford, right?
Right.
We don't know where they're going to work, but we just know. So let's get the government to set up these schools, right, to teach reading, writing, basic math, and how to follow instructions, so that by the time people graduate from public school, they will be compliant and they will know some basic reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Mhm.
They'll be where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be. They won't be anyplace else. They won't ask questions. They'll just follow the instructions as written. They won't have to think about a thing.
And they'll jump when the bell rings.
So then the question might have been, well, but okay, that's fine for factory workers, but what about, don't we still need doctors and lawyers and executives at factories and people inventing new things? Yeah. They're not going to those schools. Are you kidding me? They're going to go to the classical school, the classical way that we've always educated our privileged white, rich class, right?
Yeah.
We're fine with that. We're trying to educate the masses, right?
Mhm.
And so now public school becomes that. The privileged class gets to continue with their thing because, they're better people, right?
Mhm.
Genetically better people.
Jesus.
Okay, so that's well over 100 years ago. It's like
Mhm.
120, 130 years ago.
Yeah.
And that whole system just got a ratchet and a momentum of its own. And that is the system we've grown.
Yeah.
And so now when you look at a school and go, why is it that they're so big on showing up on time, being in your classroom at the right time, turning in your assignment on time, and if you don't, you get punished, and all they seem to really care about is reading, writing, math, and they've added in science, right? Because now you might need to know some chemistry or physics to be a good compliant office worker, right? The problem is the needs of our society have changed tremendously. We don't just need compliant factory workers who can read, write, and do math, right? We need people who can think, can reason, have critical thinking skills, and maybe know some history, maybe know some, some philosophy, maybe be able to write more than just, basic instructions. But the school system hasn't kept up with it. I think they've tried. There's been different things they've tried to do to improve on that. One of them was in the 50s, late 50s, 60s, when the United States realized that the Soviet Union was out, through espionage and other means, was beating us in the space race.
Yeah.
And it's not just getting to the moon. It's not just putting satellites in orbit. It's being able to send a payload of a thermonuclear, device within 20 minutes from Moscow to Washington, right?
Yeah.
So they said, we better catch up. We're going to need a lot of engineers, a lot of aerospace type, and people who can calculate the fuel it takes and the trajectory and get a thing up into space and back down on, from Washington to from Kansas to, Kiev, and from Kansas to Kiev, and from Kansas to Kiev, a memoir by Steve Vincent.
I was gonna say that's got a title. There's a title to something there.
Or as we say now, Kiev.
Yes.
So what they did is it's what I forget if it was Radiolab or Freakonomics, probably the Freakonomics guy. They created what he calls the geometry sandwich. So it's algebra followed by geometry, followed by algebra 2, followed by trigonometry, and then calculus. So it's a geometry sandwich in that you've got algebra, geometry in the middle, another algebra is the other slice of bread, trigonometry, which is really like advanced geometry, and then calculus. They did that so that they could get more engineers, more aerospace engineers. And now I look at it, I'm like, that's exactly like the mainstream normal, like normal kind. That's exactly the math track you get on.
Yeah.
Still.
Yeah. You were saying when you were reading those off, I'm like, yeah, because that's all my kids went through all that same stuff.
Yep. But as soon as they figure out, no, you're not college material, it's like, oh, you can stop at geometry, you can stop at whatever, right?
Yeah.
And we'll just give you basic math because you're going to be a compliant factory. So that's where the whole compliance thing comes from. And it's going to take, I don't know what it's going to take, but like me jumping up and down and screaming is not going to do anything. It's got to happen at a systemic level. And, each teacher, like I'm sure millions of teachers feel the same way. It's like, I didn't imagine myself being, in charge of measuring compliance. And now, I've got 30, 40 kids in a classroom and, they're getting in fights all the time. I don't have time to innovate and I can't innovate. I got to do what the administration told me to. We got state legislatures who can barely think their way out of a wet paper bag, writing curriculum for schools and passing it as, thou shalt teach this. We had that whole PE conversation, which we'll get into probably in a future episode. But the reason you have to take physical education is somehow Indiana state legislators decided, not teachers, not academic experts, not child development experts, people whose only skill is getting themselves elected, decided that needed to be a law.
I always took it as with the whole PE thing real quick. I always thought PE was just like, well, what can we do the cheapest? How much are balls? Well, 99 cents. All right, that's a thing now. That's a class. That's how I always follow the money with stuff. So I just assume that's why PE became such a big thing.
Yeah, I don't know why they decided. I think I bet if we looked into the history of it, we'd discover, this is my hypothesis, having done no research, we would probably discover at some point in the past, there was probably a bunch of stuff in the news about childhood obesity. Kids these days aren't as athletic as their parents' generation. Yeah. Maybe there's a military aspect, like the military's going, yeah, these kids are showing up with zero muscle mass. not knowing how to exercise. And so somebody said, we got to do something about this. Let's require physical education in school. And well, you can't just say physical education, otherwise people will cheat. So we got to be very prescriptive, and if you look at the state requirement, because I did, if you look at the state requirement, it's very specific. It's like the student will be able to do this, 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 and this, it's like, wow, that's very prescriptive.
I mean, how many board meetings do you think happened to is it going to be 10 push-ups or 12 push-ups? I wanted 11. No, that's not enough. I wanted 13. No, 9. No, like how long did that meeting go on?
Right.
By a bunch of guys that can't do 5 push-ups.
Yes, exactly. Well, they can't reach the ground. They're like T-Rex trying to do push-ups, right? They're like, I can't touch the ground. My chest is too big. Anyway. All right. Well, I don't know. We're going to do better than that. That's school. This has been about schools and academics and trying to do the right thing when things are hard, because we are better off, Dad, with Paul and Steve, and it shouldn't be this hard,